Hey y'all, Toad here. And no, this isn't the Ancient Citizens Band Radio Gear Hour. This video is going to be on communications and some various types and, you know, talk a little bit about some of my experiences and opinions. I was asked to do a video or two about this, and, you know, what the heck. I guess it's time. But we're going to move into the other room, so I'll see you over there. Alright, well, we're back here at the desk. And as you can see, there's some differences in what you usually see sitting there. It's got some changes going on. But in the meantime, like I said a little earlier, people asked me to talk a little bit about communications and the different stuff, so that's what we're going to do here. And then I'll clean this mess up. And I guess where we'll start is the most contentious one, or so it seems anyway. And that's good old Citizens Band. Yeah, you saw the rig in the other room. I've been into Citizens Band for, since the mid-late 70s. And because this is going to be about, quote-unquote prepping or on your own, as I prefer to call it, where do I think CB falls into that plan? Well, quite frankly, I don't think much of it. And I'll tell you why. If you have an emergency and communications go down, and you're relying on Citizens Band to be your primary form of communication, I think that's a mistake. Because this is not only, for the most part, a short range form of communication, it's also probably one of the most prolific. Now, during Katrina, which is what I use for a benchmark in my life, being right in the middle of it, this was useless. Not because it didn't work, because it did, but because everybody and their mother was on the radio. This, quite frankly, could be the most undisciplined form of radio communication there is. And in the aftermath of Katrina, everybody went running for their CBs. I mean, I've got the Uniden sitting here just over there off camera, and you'd be amazed how many people had CBs. Maybe they were, dug them for a while, then they take them out and stick them in their garage, and man, they came out of the woodwork. For the most part, you got 40 channels. And even in a city of 500,000 people, 40 channels, 500,000 people, zero radio discipline, and the average courtesy that you see in most American cities is what was going on there. Now, does that mean I don't think Citizens Band has a place in the prepper community? On our own, if you will? No. Yeah, it does. It does. If you are somebody who lives in a pretty rural area, maybe you have not that many people, lots of land, and you want to communicate like that, short range, yeah, Citizens Band's an inexpensive way to do that, especially with the old mobile radios that you put in your cars. I mean, you can buy those used Unidens and Cobras and whatnot. Man, you can still find those at flea markets dirt cheap. It's one of the cheapest ways to get into radio communications. So I'm not going to sit here and say Citizens Band is bad, but like anything else, I think you got to think about where you are, what your situation is, how much you're going to rely on it, all of those factors. But I certainly would not consider Citizens Band to be the be-all, end-all. And, the next one would be the Marine VHF. Oh, and by the way, that particular unit don't stand up worth a darn, but don't have any batteries in it. The Marine VHF. Okay, yeah, this is one of the standard Horizons. I have one here at the house. I have one in a ditch bag on the boat, and then I have another one that I keep floating around as a backup. Now these, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. If you're not in an emergency situation, don't use these things on land. You can get in trouble over it. In an emergency situations, line of sight, VHF, I prefer to use something like this as opposed to Citizens Band. Just the nature of the radio. It's better quality. The transmission quality is higher. If you live somewheres that's very close to navigable waterways, you can probably get away with using one of these. If you're on board a boat, obviously you can. If you're operating a base station in the marine industry, of course you can. But this is not a viable everyday, call your spouse and ask them to bring home bread kind of radio if you happen to live, in a big field in Iowa. That's just not what they're for. Now, in an emergency situation, when all bets are off, okay, I think this is a better quality radio than the Citizens Band. Again, short range, line of sight, but most of these also have the ability, or these come with all of the NOAA weather frequencies programmed into them. So, when there's not an emergency, or when there might be a weather emergency or whatnot, this might be something viable, for you. But these two have one huge thing in common. When communications go down, and this again happened during Katrina, phone lines gone. Television stations, with the exception of one, were gone. Now, this was before the digital switchover. Now, with the digital switchover, a lot of people don't have digital antennas. A lot of people are not broadcasting in analog. So it could actually get a little more interesting. If you don't have a digital antenna for your television, and you're relying on cable, or perhaps even dish, which may or may not work depending on damage, you might be closed off a little bit. But, as funny as it sounds, even with something that had the widespread damage of Katrina, cell phones still worked. Now, were you able to make oodles and oodles of calls? And oh yes, by the way, that is an old Casio. That's the first generation of the waterproof, shockproof jobbies. Yeah, I saw no reason to upgrade. Someday, if I ever want a smartphone, I'll do it. But until then, I'm gonna carry it as long as it works. Welcome to Frogtoad ways. But I really think that for the vast majority of everyday stuff, the cell phones, almost as good as these. As I was saying, in the post-Katrina thing, even where the vast majority of the towers were down, texting, for some reason, I don't understand why, texting was still working. Maybe because it's a smaller amount of information being transmitted, that it was able to get through in a lot of places where voice would not work. But if you're talking a very local emergency, or possibly even maybe up to a regional emergency, I wouldn't give up on the cell phones that fast. And I'm not sure that these guys are going to be a whole lot better. I really think these to me, these fall in almost the same category as the GMRS, FRS radios, which I have none of. I've just never been interested in that. These, to me, that's all pretty much, it all serves the same purpose. So I don't have them. Will I get some later? Hey, maybe, But the next guy makes that not really necessary. And that is, taking the step up into the 2-meter 440 handheld radios. Of course, they also make these in mobile style with higher wattage. This happens to be a really inexpensive bottom feeder. They don't get a whole lot cheaper than this little Bofang. They're not super powerful. This one does, however, I've simplexed with this radio, which means basically talking from one radio right to another one through the airwaves. Not too bad. Definitely the same range as this handheld CB, and probably not as good, quite as good as the Marine VHF, kind of depending where you are. But of course, these have the advantage of the repeaters. And just so you know, just kind of picture a repeater as being nothing more than a big giant antenna that this radio can talk to, and it bounces a signal to another radio, to somebody else's all other radios, whatever's in the area of that big antenna, and it kind of covers a big area. If you're interested in this, there's plenty of other videos out there that drop me a PM or something, and I'll direct you to them. But the bottom line is this can give you an amazing amount of range for as little as it is. Granted, big emergency towers go down. I don't think they're as vulnerable as cell phones, because a lot of people who operate the repeaters for these are operating them on a alternate power source. And ham radio people, they tend to take care of their gear and each other. They're kind of wired that way, no pun intended. But the downside, okay, these are really inexpensive, really decent range. These also, you can program all of the NOAA weather radio stations, and it has FM radio, if you dig that. So when I bought this one, it actually pretty much took the place of the other two. I don't even carry that little Citizens Band radio anymore for more reasons than just that, but it pretty much sidelined these two as emergency radios. I'll still carry this one in the car if I'm on a long road trip. Sometimes when you're driving at 2 o'clock in the morning, it is nice just to talk to the truckers. Or if you come across a wreck or something like that, you can talk to the big truck drivers and find out what you're coming into. You're talking to the drivers going the other way, that kind of thing. So that's still kind of fun, so it's cool. And I'm still very much involved in the boat world, so the Marine VHFs are not going anywheres. But in the realm of prepper communication, I've pretty much going to jump straight from the cell phone, if it doesn't work now, straight here. Will I include an FRS radio? I don't know. Maybe. But anyway, with all the good things on this, the other thing which somebody might consider bad, I personally don't, is you do need a license to use these legally. Now, there's going to be a whole bunch of people out there that are going to say, oh, well, if the crap hits the fan, or, whatever, the on-our-own situation, as I like to call it, occurs, nobody's going to be chasing licenses. Right. But one of the beauties of getting into amateur radio and having to get the license is you learn a little bit more about how and why your radio works. You learn a little bit more about your equipment and how to maintain it and take care of it. And more importantly, you learn to respect the other people that are using these radios. And that can make all the difference in the world in an emergency situation. You do not want to get on your CB or your FRS radio and be trying to relay or contact somebody in an emergency situation and hear some of the outright rude garbage you hear, especially on Citizens Band. Not so much Marine VHF. Although you may have, depending on where you are, you might have trouble finding somebody who speaks English on here unless you can contact the Coast Guard. Which, of course, in theory, it's relatively easy. Depends where you live to get to the Coast Guard with Marine VHF. Where I live, it's easy. Even right here in this room, if I turn that thing on and keyed up on the emergency channel, the local Coast Guard would probably hear me and get back to me, even on that little bitty handheld, because they're not that far away and they are monitoring. But anyway, if you've spent any time on Citizens Band lately, it can be a real sewage pit, and it's not exactly full of courteous professionals. Now, I'm not saying that the ham radio is perfect. Ham radio world is perfect. It's not. It's not. There's just as many. I'm going to say it's not true. There are a reasonable amount of people who are not the nicest or most courteous, but this does give you a lot more options on frequencies. Not only for emergency, you get a hold of somebody, or at least you'll be able to communicate with your predetermined people that you're going to communicate with. And that's a real important point I want to make. Everybody worries about, emergencies. What kind of emergencies are you talking about? If your car breaks down on the side of the road, cell phone's gonna work probably 90% of the time, especially if I have Verizon. I travel all over the country. I have found maybe half a dozen times where I've not been able to get a signal. Am I just lucky? Maybe, but so to me that's viable. And then as a backup, other motorists and big trucks, and that's if you have an emergency. If you get caught in the middle of an emergency, and it's not just you or your family, there's a really good chance that somebody else is going to know about it. And if you've gone and gotten your license, and you've met the other people on the radios, there's a real good chance there's going to be somebody listening. Even during Katrina, there was plenty of people out on the ham bands gathering information. So I guess you got to kind of think of it, from the perspective of reality. If you have an emergency, and the rest of the world doesn't, your cell phone's probably going to be working just fine. If you don't have a cell phone signal, the American truckers are still floating around in a lot of places, and most of them are still some pretty amazing people. They'll do what they can to at least get a message across. If you live in an area, like I said, where there's a lot of navigable waterways, marine VHF is another deal. So that's, 3 potential things you can do to contact somebody if you are having an emergency. If your region is having an emergency, the SHTF or, Tiatawaki, pick your whatever the hell you want to call it, in something that would really interest a prepper, just put it that way, I think that the sheep are going to be clogging this up. In fact, I've seen it. Like I said, post-Katrina, this was a sewer. In a really bad situation, if you live in anywhere near a major urban area, this is going to be a sewer. If you're lucky enough to be in a rural area, okay, hey, you might get away with this. That's fine. Make your own choice. You live on the coast. You live near the bigger rivers, navigable waterways. That's another potential choice. But I think if you want to have a good shot at communicating with like-minded people, and have more options, that getting your license so you know how, and starting out by picking up one of these little Bowfangs, or there's the Woshans, ICOMs, there's lots of radios out there. Again, if you want more information, PM me, and I'll push you in some right directions, because I'm not an expert, but I do know other people who have other versions of these radios and give you some other options. I think this is something that everybody who identifies with the prepper community should at least take a good, long, hard look. And yeah, now that I've thrown my 2 cents in, do I consider Citizens Band Radio to be the be-all, end-all for preppers? No, I do not. And I would not recommend this as being the only place that you have to turn to when the cell phone stops working. Alright, y'all, I gotta clean this mess up because, as I said before, this area is changing. There's gonna be some new stuff here, and I need to get to it. Alright, y'all, fair winds. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time around.